This week, I would like to talk a little about Renoir, the great French painter, who specialized more or less in portraits of beautiful young ladies. So we have Amanda here, who's kindly offered to sit in agony for the little time we have to make this picture. Renoir worked exclusively in a limited palette, about 8 to 9 colors. It varies. And he would first place on the canvas roughly the head, just blocking it in quickly with a few lines. Roughing it out. This is called roughing it out. This, of course, I'm drawing with red chalk, sanguine. He would use anything, charcoal, it doesn't matter much what you use, but the actual thing is to obtain the drawing. Pierre Renoir was born in 1841 in Limoges in France, lived a long life and died in 1919. He started off as a porcelain painter. After his initial training, he became influenced by Impressionism, and eventually he went through a period where he worked in the plein air at the seaside and on the Seine with Monet. They were very poor at this period. They're both young men, about 23. And they worked painting pot boilers, and indeed they did what I term Sexton Blakes, both of them making paintings in the style of the Barbizon school and selling them and signing them. They're very naughty, but they needed the money. No one mattered. It didn't matter much in those days. And so he was influenced by pure Impressionism until he gradually worked away from this, because it is a relatively easy method of painting, relative to, of course, a so-called academic painting, which takes much more discipline. So he left the group in this sense and became a one-off chap. He just worked alone in a garden he rented, a little studio near Montmartre, and painted his delightful portraits, mainly of young girls, mainly of the working class, the Parisians, and eventually he found patronage amongst people like Madame Charpentier and her husband and a lot of the bourgeoisie of Paris, and soon he created in his own way a form of painting which will always be known through the history of art as delightful, charming, innocuous, beautiful, and has influenced many painters. I'm not really copying faithfully Renoir's technique because it's rather slow. This is really just to try to help anyone who's learning to paint. By using 2 colors, black and white or red and white, whatever, especially on a toned canvas, you achieve a rather quick result, which helps your painting. Don't aim for the likeness at first, just draw what you see. In paint, the subtleties of form and the character of the person will appear. They'll go away, you'll lose them, they'll return. It's a bit like love. And this is the beauty of it. It's unlike photography, where you more or less get an immediate result. So just rough in, just loosely drawing. And when you've finally gone through the whole thing, then it's a good time to go on the paint broadly. I've laid a palette that Renoir would have used, more or less, and pre-mixed a few colours to save time. The object of the operation is to stand back as far as you can, commensurate with comfort, and touch in the lights. Renoir painted practically until the day he died. He was, of course, arthritic and had a chair, and he was carried to a studio or into the garden to work by his family. And despite his pain and agony, he worked with brushes strapped to his wrists by bandages. He worked with smaller brushes. I'm using a larger brush to get it done rather quicker. And he would use impasto, thick paint, placed in spots. An enormous amount of separate colours. Having achieved a certain form on the face, it's a good idea then to go into the background. We make it a kind of rough green. This enables you to draw around the profile or whatever is there. It gives you a double chance. And you will see then the mistakes you've made, and you can adjust your forms according to how they go. And he would enliven the background with, again, with short pieces, something in the nature of this, just to liven it up. This is the material at the back. The same green from the back could be used to indicate the eye. All this is qualified later, so that you have cold, warm, light, dark. This is the old formula. I'll make a few darkish marks. He would observe the profile of everything to make sure that he'd drawn things reasonably correctly. The ear has to go in. The same colour under the neck will help you to realise the form and shadows. As you paint, you draw. They're synonymous. They're not separate things. They should be the same process. Now, we have a great secret here of Renoir's. He was aware, as a landscape painter, that the blue colours, the cool colours, go away from you, as in the horizons of landscapes and so forth. So the outer drawing lines, there were no lines in nature actually, but the outer drawing lines he drew in cobalt blue because it sends it away. And quite logically, those that are near you he made warm, except, as in all good draftsmen, where the bones meet. There's one there, there's the cheekbone, there's the nasal bone, all called off. One is a tonal thing, and the other is a perspective ploy. Having established that, we now come to the most difficult part of the face, really, are the lips. They're terribly difficult to paint because this is foreshortened. You need a steady hand and much patience. And under the lip is the shadow of the bottom lip. Under the nose is the shadow the nose is casting down because our light is coming from the top. Renoir actually painted quite often in the open air, plein air painting, figure painting, nudes and things. He had a garden, and it was secluded. Not as I don't think the Parisians would have minded seeing a naked lady, but or gentleman. But he posed ladies and gentlemen in the garden. He was much inclined towards youth. He loved young girls, don't we all? And he managed somehow to imbue them with a special kind of French magic. And this is because, like all great artists, he emphasized salient features. This is one of them. Here you have the zygomatic, comes down, and this area here makes the lips protrude, the top lip. Then there's a sensuous bottom lip. And here, this little piece here, in little children, pre-puberty more or less, there's an area of flesh that has an extreme subtlety in it. You observe it in young children about 12, 10. And when this is painted in conjunction with the high cheekbone and the sensuous mouth, pouting in a way, it creates the Renoir-esque girl, plus the shape of the head and all the attendant dresses and so forth. His eyes also, of course, being the windows of the soul, are always emphasized in the matter of enlargement and intensity, and an emphasis placed on the blackening with mascara and so on, the lashes and surrounding areas. Now this young lady has auburn hair, so we use a sienna as a base, burnt sienna, and then when this is more or less roughed in, one picks the highlights out with the colour that you can see here. It's more or less yellow ochre. They vary. Whilst I'm on that red bit, we'll tint the edges a little bit with red. This is under the nose. This gives the flesh and the lip, which of course will not be the same kind of red because quite often ladies use lipstick of about 10,000 different hues. But it's just to get the shape of the lips. In here, in the eye, there's a touch of red where the tear duct is. On the top lid is a red underneath. On the bottom one, a weaker one, because of the top light. And this will all look rough, but it all helps towards the finished article. And it helps if you know what you're doing. Now, I mentioned earlier that Renoir used blue for going away lines, and here we put a bit of warmth in there to bring this area, which is against this, to differentiate. I paint the ear in very quickly in one mass, and you can work white in white on that if one wants to. And here we come to a brief suggestion of the highlights in the eye. One should keep this until the last, but it does help to give them a bit of life at this stage, because all art, all painting is relative. And now you have a blocked-in head, very crudely, of course, but there you could take a little brush, smaller brush, and by pre-mixing the various colours you see, you can work in the style of the Impressionists by a few dabs of colour here and there, called touch painting. Renoir was what is termed working class, which means he had to work for a living. Of course, he was trained, as we know, as a porcelain painter, and of course this affected his method, technique. It's not an easy form. I don't find it an easy. I don't find any painting easy, but I certainly don't find his kind of painting easy, because it requires a lot of patience. And it's a peculiar technique, but of course he used transparent colours, following the tradition of the porcelain painting, and he achieved this by dabs of colour in juxtaposition, making the shadows rich and many-coloured. And you can see how you can build up the paint, keeping it thick in the highlights and relatively thin in the shadows. Not too thin, because that isn't the Impressionist technique. When the painting is rather unmanageable because there's too much on it, it's a good idea to get a piece of newspaper and take the excess paint off. This is called tonking. This will take the excess paint off. It's named after Professor Tonk. This gives you a chance to qualify again. And you can work on the existing paint, which before there was rather too much of. Work slowly. Little touches of pigment, blending them in. The old masters, of course, used badger blenders and softeners, but this type of painting requires a different approach. So they work from the light to the middle tones and into the depths. Now, the Impressionists tried to achieve effects without middle tones, especially Manet. It's creating a relatively flat surface. The handling of the brush is entirely different in this technique. One is almost stippling it on. Now, Renoir used squiggles. If you look into a Renoir, there are little tiny jabs of paint. It's almost intuitive. Very difficult to emulate, because I'm not Renoir. Now, in this state, it's possible to draw again your lines. So we go back to where we started from. These little touches of colour helping with the drawing and creating this peculiar technique of the Impressionists. I'm emphasising the blue drawing lines, but that is more or less how they would be. Then you qualify this yet again with yet more colour, using pure colours here and there. I'll put a bit in there, just to emphasise, and under there, and under there. All this is helping the painting to become formalised and alive. When you've used blue a lot, or better still, if you put a touch of red with the blue, make a mauve, they use purple a lot, you'll find that the painting will take on a completely different aspect and life. In the painting of hair, which of course Renoir was most interested in, one has to work in tones, the same as flesh, etc., but with a softness, no harsh lines. It should blend into the background. And at a certain stage in the painting, when it's more or less dried off a bit, soft sable brushes are often used to blend the colours in. There's a lot of rich colour in here, which needs glazes. Now, I've done a previous picture, which is a little more finished, and immediately you can see from the model there's an enormous amount of work to do on it, so we do a little more, and then leave it until another time, and obviously I can only do a little now. But the kind of thing you see with a fresh eye are the lights in the hair, for instance, require a little more work done. Each colour has its own highlight and reflection. In the work of Sir Charles Locke Eastlake, there's a chart he's very cleverly made which gives all the relative lights and reflections in nature, but it's best to use one's own eyes, and you'll find that, say, in auburn hair there is a golden glint. In the reflections it's quite hot, there are very red touches where the reflected light. Now, as this is a green-grey background, you would have, besides the warmth, you would have cold grey lights catching here and there. This divorces the head from the background. It's a cutting out thing. Commercial artists of all kinds use, in black and white illustrations, they use a white. They divorce things by drawing a white line round. When you're painting a portrait, or indeed any painting, and you want a fresh approach, instead of walking away for a fortnight and coming back, it's good to get a mirror and look at your painting in the mirror. It not only reduces the painting like a reducing glass, but you see it, all the defects in it, with the drawing defects and the astigmatic or cross-eyed aspect of eyes and so forth. Also, it's a good idea to turn the painting upside down, a portrait, and immediately you will observe if the nose is sticking out and so on. You observe the three-dimensional aspect of it. If you look closely into his impressionistic paintings, they use a very strange expression. They're crude and yet they're subtle. They have this spontaneous touch, which only comes from years of experience and surety of expression. You observe the ladies today, they put blue around their eyes like the ancient Egyptians to create mystery. There'll be a bit in the hair in places and so forth. And at about this stage, obviously I could go on this for another day or so, this is about all one can achieve at this stage, and one needs time and patience and to allow the picture to dry off, and then give it a lovely coat of intermediate varnish, and on a happy day start again, fresh, thinking of Renoir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda.